The train's whistle cried across the plains like a wounded hawk, cutting through the wind that swept the dry fields of Wyoming. The platform at Red Hollow was nearly empty, just dust, a broken sign, and a man waiting alone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his coat faded by sun and rain, hat pulled low against the glare. His name was Samuel Braddock, a widowed rancher whose silence was as steady as the land he worked. He'd lost his wife 2 winters ago and buried his child long before that. Since then, the world had shrunk to chores, cattle, and ghosts that didn't stop talking when the nights grew long. When the train doors opened, a single woman stepped down, clutching a frayed shawl against her shoulders. She looked around uncertainly, her eyes meeting his for just a heartbeat before lowering again. Her name was Mara Finch, and she carried no luggage but a small bundle wrapped in old cloth. Samuel nodded, removed his hat, and said, "Miss Finch?" She nodded faintly. "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft, polite, but behind it something trembled. "I'm Samuel Braddock. You got a long ride ahead, so we best get moving." He offered his hand, rough and scarred, and she took it. Her fingers were cold, too light, the hands of someone who'd known more work than rest. The wagon creaked along the dirt road, wheels crunching over stone. The sun poured down heavy and gold, stretching their shadows long behind them. For miles, neither spoke. Mara's eyes moved over the horizon, the endless brown, the broken fences, the hawk circling high above. It was a lonely beauty, the kind that both comforted and frightened her. "You live far out?" she asked finally. "Far enough," he replied. "No neighbors for half a day's ride." She nodded. "That sounds peaceful." "Sometimes," he said. Then after a pause, "Sometimes it's just quiet." By afternoon, the ranch came into view, a low house of timber and stone, sitting in the middle of miles of fenced earth. A few cows grazed near a stream, their bells faint in the distance. Samuel stopped the wagon and helped her down. "Ain't fancy," he said, "but it's home." Mara looked around slowly. "It's more than I've had." Her words caught him off guard. He'd expected gratitude, maybe nervousness, but there was no pretense in her voice, just simple truth. He picked up her bundle. "Room's ready. You can rest." Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine and smoke. The walls were clean but bare, a single cross above the door, a wooden chair near the window. Mara placed her shawl on the bed and sat quietly. Samuel lingered in the doorway, uncertain of what to say. Finally, she spoke first. "I suppose you know why they called me barren." The word hung in the room like dust in sunlight. Samuel's eyes hardened slightly. "Ain't my business what other folks say." "They said I couldn't give a man a future," she continued softly. "Said I was useless to the family name, so they sold me off." She gave a bitter smile that didn't reach her eyes. "To clear a debt." Samuel's jaw clenched, the leather of his gloves creaking. "You're not a debt," he said. "You're a person." She looked up, studying him. "Then why send for me?" He hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the window where the fields burned under the sunset. "Because I don't need children," he said quietly. "I need someone who remembers how to live." For the first time, her breath caught. No man had ever said something like that to her, not with such quiet certainty. She looked down, unable to hold his gaze. "You don't even know me." He nodded slowly. "No, but I reckon I know what it means to be left behind." That night, the house was still. The only sound was the low hum of the wind moving through the tall grass outside. Samuel sat by the fire, staring into the flames. In the next room, Mara lay awake, listening to the creak of old wood, the cry of coyotes far away, and the unfamiliar sound of safety. She didn't know if she could trust it yet, or him, but for the first time in years, no one called her a burden. When the fire died low, Samuel looked toward her closed door. He thought of what the townsfolk had said when he told them he was taking in a barren bride. They'd laughed, said he'd gone soft, said a man needed heirs to leave a mark. But Samuel didn't care. The world had already taken everything he'd tried to build. What he needed now wasn't blood or legacy. It was something far rarer. He needed peace. And though neither of them knew it yet, peace had a strange way of coming disguised as love. The next morning, the sky was wide and clear, the kind of blue that made even hard men pause before starting their day. Samuel was already outside when Mara stepped onto the porch, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. The air smelled of dust and grass, of horses and sunlight. He was fixing a fence post, hammering in silence, his movements slow but sure. She watched for a moment, then quietly asked, "What can I do to help?" He turned, sweat glinting at his temple. "Ain't much to be done you can't learn. You know how to milk a cow?" She gave a small nod. "Good. Then let's start there." The hours passed with the rhythm of work, pails clinking, chickens scattering, the low hum of cattle in the distance. Mara moved carefully at first, unsure if she belonged here, but the land had its own way of teaching. The dirt, the wind, the sound of hooves, it reminded her that life didn't ask for permission. Samuel watched her now and then, quiet admiration hidden beneath his usual stoicism. She was smaller than he'd expected, fragile-looking, yet there was a quiet endurance in her, something he hadn't seen in years. By midday, she was laughing, softly, but real, when one of the goats knocked over her bucket. Samuel looked up from where he was repairing a trough and found himself smiling without meaning to. It startled him. "You're getting the hang of it," he said. "Barely," she replied, brushing dust from her dress. "The animals seem to sense I'm new here." "They'll learn you," he said, still smiling faintly. "Everything learns its place sooner or later." As the sun lowered toward the horizon, Samuel hitched the horses and offered her a seat on the wagon. "Come on," he said. "Want to show you something?" They rode out past the fields, beyond the fences until the land opened wide before them, a quiet valley framed in gold. The light made everything seem softer, more alive. He stopped the horses and nodded ahead. "This is the south pasture. Been thinking of planting alfalfa here next spring." She looked around in awe. "It's beautiful." "It's work," he said simply, then after a pause, "But it's mine." He looked at her then, his voice gentler. "Could be yours too if you want it." The words hung between them, heavy and kind all at once. She wanted to believe him, to believe that this man, this land, could hold something more than pity for her. But she'd been promised kindness before, and kindness had turned to cruelty too many times. "You don't know what you're offering," she said quietly. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I know what I'm missing." His gaze stayed steady on her. "I know what it's like to wake up every day and wish someone else was there to see it." That night, as they sat by the fire, she asked him the question she'd been holding back since she arrived. "Your wife," she said softly. "What was she like?" Samuel stared at the flames for a long time. She was kind, fierce when she had to be. The land took her same year the fever came through town. Took our boy too. He didn't look at her as he spoke. After that I stopped praying. Figured maybe God had enough of me. Mara's eyes softened. "I know that feeling," she whispered. "When you start to believe the world's done with you." For a long moment neither spoke. The fire crackled, wind pressed against the windows. Then Samuel reached over and handed her a small silver locket. "Found this in town last week," he said. "Was gonna sell it, but thought maybe you'd like it instead." Inside was a small pressed flower, long faded but still holding a trace of color. Mara traced it with her fingertip, her eyes glimmering in the firelight. "Why?" she asked. "Because you looked like you needed to be reminded you're still here," he said. The following days grew easier. Mara began to hum while she worked, a sound so gentle it blended with the breeze. She mended clothes, fed livestock, even started a small garden behind the house. Samuel noticed how the place began to change, not in structure but in spirit. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt alive again, and he realized almost reluctantly that he wasn't alone anymore. One evening, they rode into town for supplies. The whispers started the moment they walked into the general store, women murmuring, men snickering. "That her?" someone said under their breath. "The barren one?" Samuel's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Mara lifted her chin and met their eyes. "Yes," she said clearly. "That's me." The one they said was no good for a man. And yet here I am, and still standing. The room fell silent. Samuel's heart swelled with something fierce and proud. As they left the store, he turned to her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but someone has to remind them what a woman's worth isn't measured by." He looked at her then, the way a man looks at the first sunrise after a storm. "Mara," he said quietly, "you're the strongest thing I've ever seen." And for the first time she believed him.